Hey friends, welcome to Biblical Studies Today Sermon Spotlights. Up this weekend at the Masters Community Church, preaching John 12, 37 to 50. Here we're at the end of John 12. We are at the end of this first section of John, where John portrays Jesus' miracles one after another and the messages that he preaches along the way. This section of John, miracles, messages, signs, sermons, we could describe it in a few different ways, but all of this adding up to this crucial section here. When I preach, I try to think through three lenses when I look at a passage of Scripture: literature, history, and theology. Much of this articulated in Andreas Kostenberger's book, Invitation to Biblical Interpretation, where he describes this as a hermeneutical triad, a way we interpret Scripture in three different lenses. When we think about the literature of the Gospel of John and the literary devices that John uses and its flow here at the end of John 12, what we have in many ways is Jesus saying things that John said at the end of John 3. These are really two places where you could grab hold of the whole of this section of John's Gospel, the end of John 3, end of John 12, and this summative perspective of all that the Son has brought in terms of the revelation of God to humanity in the Son. And here, Jesus doing all these signs and yet rejected. But this brings together these ideas of literature from John 3 here to John 12, and these signs all adding up together, especially after the resurrection of Lazarus in John 11. And that leads us to think about history, because that's a moment through which we can see the historical situation of Israel and the Jewish leadership at this time in their league of assistance, as Josephus describes it, with the Roman Empire. And the Sanhedrin gathered together, worried that Rome's going to come and take away their place and their nation. This is the historical situation. Leads us back to John 9, when the man is healed, the man born blind is healed, and he's kicked out of the synagogue. All of this is history, and it helps us to understand the really difficult position that early Christians were in, being kicked out of the synagogue, not having a place in the Roman Empire because they didn't worship the emperor or the gods. They were really a group of people with no help, no protection. They were refugees, but they had each other. And that helps us to think even about the theological portrayal of John's gospel. John, along the way, is building up the church community. That's why he begins in chapter 13 to speak about love for one another. Love for one another is so important because these people need each other. It's not an add-on, it's a necessity. That's why I have it in John 13, John 15, and all the way through. It really helps us to understand the New Testament. It also provides us here the theological opportunity to think about God's sovereignty and his choice to open people's eyes to see. So I'm going to be trying to help the congregation think through the literary arrangement of John's gospel, the historical situation of early Christians, and the theological perspective of God's sovereignty and the value of the local church. It's going to be a great run, a lot to get done, and I'll circle up with you afterward to let you know how it goes. For more sermon spotlights, go to biblicalstudiestoday.com. For information on courses and degree programs in preaching and biblical studies, go to mbts.edu. We'll see you again next time.